Well, with all the Libya news, I haven't had a chance to talk about the new defense budget for fiscal year 2020. This is always a big crowning achievement, a great bipartisan consensus that has to be reached every year on just how many billions and billions of dollars we're going to throw at the Department of Defense, headquartered at the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. And this year, the magic number is $738 billion. Nearly 3/4 of $1 trillion. And so what does that get us? Well, it gets us the smoking age raised to 21 years of age in all 50 states, which somehow has something to do with the defense budget. And it also gets us lots of military-industrial complex welfare. So I guess I'll address the smoking age thing first, since that seems to be making a lot of headlines. Congratulations, if you live in the United States and you are a smoker under 21 years of age, you're going to have your parents go buy you cigarettes now. Because even though you're an adult, the federal government has decided that they're going to force all the states to try and raise the age to 21. And the way that legally, I don't think they can actually do this. I don't think because it's not a federal law. This is in the budget. This is not a law. So it's different. They didn't make it illegal. What they've done is this, I assume, is similar to what they used to do when they made all the states lower the speed limit to 55 miles per hour on all the highways. And so what they would do is they would withhold federal funding from states that didn't do what the federal government wanted. And because states rely so much on the federal government for grants and things like that, because the tax structure has been so centralized in the United States, because we are no longer a federation. We're much closer now to a unitary republic fiscally speaking, even if politically we are still federal. And so the federal government has the power to impose laws on the several states just through withholding funding. And so it's a pretty clear message. You don't raise your smoking age, you're going to lose your federal funding. So that's in this budget. Now, $71.5 billion of this budget go to overseas contingency operations, which, for those of you who live outside of the Washington Beltway, overseas contingency operations is a code term for illegal wars that are not authorized by a declaration of war, wars that just sort of are it's just whatever the president might want to do. That's what an overseas contingency operation is. And so Congress has awarded President Trump almost $72 billion to go just do whatever he wants overseas without congressional authorization, whether it be, starve children in Yemen or bomb hospitals in Afghanistan or what have you. Now, this is less than 10% of the overall Pentagon budget, so it might surprise a lot of people. You would think that, what we're spending so much money on in this defense budget are all these expensive overseas wars, right? Isn't that what we're spending lots of money on? Well, that $72 trillion is probably only talking about, the combat operations. It's not talking about all the money that the U.S. spends in terms of, trying to rebuild Afghanistan and all the other things that are in, like the U.S. Department of Agriculture's budget that have to do with the wars overseas. But also, it is true that the wars themselves are not really the biggest expense when it comes to the warfare state. What really costs the warfare state a lot of money is buying all the weapons. And yes, part of the reason why the government has to buy lots of weapons is to, because they're fighting these wars, but they're buying way more weapons than they ever need to fight these wars. If you look at what the big ticket items when it comes to funding the Pentagon budget, these are not things that get used in the terror wars overseas. We're talking about things like aircraft carriers and F-35s and battleships and things that you don't need to fight Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. You don't need an F-35 to go bomb some Taliban guys. You can do it just fine with an F-16 or with an A-10 Warthog or something like that. Hell, you'd probably do just as fine of a job fighting the Taliban, with a P-51 Mustang. Now, the real reason why the U.S. spends hundreds of billions of dollars every year buying new weapons, mostly tied up in, like I said, aircraft carriers, battleships, tanks, planes. These are, so that they can remain on the cutting edge of global military technology, so that, in case we get involved in a conventional war with China, we'll be able to take them on. when in reality this is all a big, big waste of money. It's a big fiction. It's a fairy tale, because the U.S. will never get involved in a conventional war with China or any other nuclear state because they have nuclear weapons. Going to war with a nuclear-armed state is not an option, because ultimately, if you get close to where it looks like you're going to win and the other side gets desperate, well, they're going to use their nukes. And if they use their nukes, then we use their nukes, and it's mutually assured destruction. So there's no case. You can't, I mean, because the Pentagon plans for this. So they say, oh, well, here's what we would do if we wanted to invade China. No, invading China is not an option. You're never going to do it. And if you did do it, we'd lose anyway. So there's no point preparing for that. There's no point buying all these battleships. They say, oh, well, we need 11 aircraft carriers to maintain our vital national security interests. It's like, no, you don't. You don't need 11 aircraft carriers. You probably don't even need one aircraft carrier. And they say, oh, we got to have these brand new F-35s so that our planes are better than theirs. And, leave aside all the arguments about whether or not the F-35 is even a good plane, because a lot of people say that it isn't. I don't know enough about planes to really tell you. But let's say that it is, the greatest fighter jet ever designed. Do we need it? No. Because you're not going to get into any dogfights with Chinese fighters or Russian fighters or anybody else's fighters who happens to be a decent military power, because pretty much every decent military in this world has nukes. At least anyone that we'd go to war with. Anyone who's considered an enemy by Washington. And so all this crap is useless. They come up with these fantasies about how they're going to, oh, well, what if we get into a war with Russia? And what if they invade Germany? What are we going to do? Oh, well, here's what we're going to do. And then so this becomes an excuse. All this planning becomes an excuse to hand over billions and billions of dollars to companies like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon every year to not only purchase incredibly overpriced and inflated weapon systems, but also to fund the development of new weapons. But of course, if you speak out against any of this, if you even criticize one line item within the National Defense Authorization Act, what do they say? They say, oh, well, you hate the troops. Don't you want the troops to get paid? The amount of money that goes to the salaries of the soldiers is minuscule. You can't even find the salary of the soldiers in this budget. In fact, you know what? You know what I would say to people in Congress who, want to push this crap is I say, hey, I've got an idea. How about we triple the salary of every soldier in the U.S. military, but cut out all the rest of this crap and just stop buying new tanks and stop funding the research and development of Lockheed Martin and all this other crap. And of course, that would be like still 5% probably of the amount of money that they are currently spending if you cut out all that other crap and just left it to the troop salary and gave them all a raise. And that, of course, would just point out how absurd this whole operation is and how these people wrap themselves in the flag and say, oh, well, I just love America and the soldiers, and that's why I'm voting for the National Defense Authorization Act. It's so disgusting, every last one of them. It just makes me want to walk up to my congressman and spit in his face. I mean, this is exactly the kind of crap that Eisenhower warned against in his, military-industrial complex speech. This is what he was talking about. It's like, hey, the defense budget is going to be completely overtaken by all these guys who just want to sell more and more weapons. All these guys who got rich during World War II selling crap to the government. They're going to want to keep doing that. They want to keep the gravy train going. And so, and the Pentagon feeds into this. Because, believe it or not, these guys, when they're not spending their own money, they're very loose with their wallets. And so the Lockheed salesmen are very good at telling them, oh, you need this, and you need this, and you need this. And the generals go, you know what, you're right. I'm going to go ask Congress for this. And then Congress says, well, we love the troops, so we're going to give you whatever you want. All with the excuse of, oh, well, if we buy this better technology, it makes the troops safer out there. It makes it easier to do their job. And if you don't want them to have the best tools to do their job, well, then you hate the troops. I'll tell you what, if you want to protect the troops, what you should do is never sign another NDAA again, because the NDAA is also necessary because every 2 years, according to the Constitution, it's illegal to have a standing army in America. You can't have it. You can't have this permanent army. It was specifically written into the Constitution that the U.S. wouldn't have a permanent standing army. So the only way that legally we're able to maintain our standing army is by reauthorizing it every 2 years and essentially creating a new, Congress raising a new army every 2 years. Well, if you just all of a sudden stopped passing those reauthorizations, well, then what would happen? The Army would have to demobilize because it would no longer have any legal mandate. And so what would happen? All the troops would come home, and they'd get out, of all these war zones that they're involved in, where they're accomplishing absolutely nothing. And guess what? They'd all be safe and sound back home. So if you really care about the troops, just vote against every National Defense Authorization Act that ever comes before Congress. The problem is not that these people, however, though, don't sufficiently love the troops. It's that they love the military-industrial complex more. It's that they love having their donations from these defense contractors more. They love being taken out to dinner by these slick Lockheed salesmen. And really, nothing, I don't think, will ever change that, other than, as I've said, if we come to an end of the current regime and there's some kind of national bankruptcy and the money just stops flowing. That's the only thing that'll put an end to this. This is systemic. It's institutionalized. There's nothing that can be done to change this. Electing new people is never going to change this. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.